Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more.
Welcome back to Compass Points, a weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, education, government, legal issues, really whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Fox Mayshark, co-founder of Compass, and I am flying semi-solo here this week. I'm missing my colleague and fellow co-founder Scott Barker, who is unfortunately home under the weather, so send a little thought out to Scott. Fortunately, I am here in the palatial studios of Barbarian Productions with our fearless producer, Lord Seth, and he is going to maybe chime in a little bit with me here this week. So
I don't feel like less of a person right now at all from your preparatory description of my semi all by myself statement. But
all
it's about to start raining finally.
Myself.
Yeah.
It is about to start raining. Yeah, let's even though Scott's not here, let's go ahead and do the regular weekly. Scott always asks Seth to give us a 3-day-old weather report, because this will be 3 days old at least by the time you're hearing this. And yes, Seth, we are sitting here. It's gray outside. This rain that has been forecasted for the last few days is clearly starting to arrive here.
It is indeed. Get your canoes ready. It might be. There is a little warning of maybe some localized flooding. So if you're in one of those places, I hope you can get out now that it's been a couple of days. But I don't know. It might still be raining by the time this releases, so this might not be as inaccurate as the standard one. But the rain is coming, and we need it. That's been a big topic on the local weather reports, is how dry that December we had was, and so we need to get our moisture levels back up and get back to a little bit normal. So we'll take
so we can see some spring flowers.
Yeah, we'll take the weather we need, and I guess for most of us, I would suppose let's be glad it's not 27 degrees and this much, because like there's up to 4 inches locally is what they're talking about.
Yeah. If this was snow, this would be a lot of snow.
It'd be like a foot plus probably. I think would be the math. I don't know what the math is exactly on water.
Right. The volume
snow
is much higher because snow is lighter and so forth.
And you know how it is around here. For a foot of snow, it might get apocalyptic in this town if we had a foot of snow in a day.
Yeah.
So
well, I hope everybody, again, by the time you're hearing this weather system will be at least so much. It is supposed to rain for like the next 24 hours at least, I think. So I hope everybody's managed to stay at least somewhat safe and dry. I have to drive out to the airport later this afternoon, and just hope that things aren't too hairy. All right. Well, aside from the weather, Seth, anything else going on in your world that you want to relate to the folks?
Well, I mean, we did officially open Hollaroo sign up. So if
Hollaroo down in Happy
26
Holler
is back, the 9th of May this year. It was supposed to be on the 2nd, but something's happening at Nayland that's more important than us. So we got pushed a little bit, but it's just fine. The city has been great in working with us and making sure we can keep close to what we were trying to do. But if you're interested in the Derby or sponsoring or being
the Derby, just to be clear, this is a good old-fashioned soapbox Derby that you do down there.
Yep, and so hollaroo.co, you can go and see more information and sign up there if you're interested in any of the parts and pieces.
It's super fun. I've been down to watch some of those races.
It's a blast. Like, it's funny because like when we started out, like it kind of more started out trying to do the festival concert side of it was kind of our, like the Derby was definitely part of the plan, but like we really wanted to focus on putting on a good concert to bring people out. And we've discovered over time that more people are coming to hang out for the Derby than they are for the concert.
Well, because, I mean, you can go see live music in Knoxville pretty much any day of the year, but you cannot go see a Derby running down North Central Street except for a couple times a year.
Exactly. Well, yeah, at least once a year, if maybe twice a year, we'll see. But we did get some complaints on not doing Hollaroo this year, so we'll have to tackle that as things go. But
all right, well, something to look forward to. Put it on your calendar for May. We do have some things to talk about this week. We'll hit on an interesting lawsuit filed against the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra by a guy who says they should have hired him, even though they didn't. Knoxville, the city of Knoxville officials reported some good news about both crime and car crash data from last year. We'll look at that. Oak Ridge National Lab is taking part in a big national effort to construct a gigantic artificial intelligence cloud to assist in scientific research. Hit on that. Some interesting discussion in East Knoxville about a major piece of property there and the potential that the Emerald Youth Foundation, which was previously interested in developing a recreation center over at part of Chilhowie Park, which of course we've talked about a lot, and that did not come through. But they may still be looking at a spot there on Martin Luther King, and we will talk about that. But let's start out talking about ICE, U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Of course, very much in the news over this past week because an ICE agent in Minneapolis shot and killed an unarmed woman in her car. I don't need to tell you the details of this. It's been all over the place. You probably already have ideas about it, one way or the other. Certainly I do. I will say for the record that I think the New York Times has assembled the best available video into a pretty compelling narrative of what happened in that incident. If you haven't seen that, I would recommend going and watching it because it does a good job of showing the sequence of events, where the car was, where the ICE officers were, where the ICE officer who did the fatal shooting was throughout it. And as the Times' own headline on that story says, the video appears to contradict the official version of events that we have all been forcefully handed by assorted federal officials out of the White House and the Department of Homeland Security. So ICE is in the news. ICE has been in the news a lot over the past year because of President Donald Trump's massive expansion of the agency and the increasingly aggressive tactics that ICE agents have been using across the country to pursue and detain immigrants or people who they suspect of maybe being immigrants who are here illegally. And there is a local angle to this. As we reported this past week, ICE is looking to set up a new office right here in West Knoxville. There is a small existing ICE office over off Executive Park Drive near Cedar Bluff, but this would be a larger office space. They put out, so the U.S. General Services Administration, which handles real estate for the whole federal government, put out a solicitation last September looking for property in 14 cities across the country to open new ICE offices, and Knoxville's one of those cities. And we have it linked on our website, the solicitation that they put out, but they identified basically a zone that they're looking to locate this new office in, and it's in West Knoxville, sort of roughly bounded by Pellissippi Parkway, Middlebrook Pike, Amherst Road, and South North Shore Drive. So kind of in it included, like right where we're sitting, Seth, in your studio. This could be a neighbor to you.
If the recode Knox changes, it could be an immediate neighbor. It really depends on what the zoning is by the time this gets figured out.
Yeah. So they said they're looking for about 11,000, 12,000 square feet of space.
I think a quick point of clarification, as I read in the story you guys read, is this is not to be a detention center. That's right. By any stretch. This is just offices, places for the agents to go and do paperwork, or have meetings or whatever kind of stuff. I mean,
obviously foreseeing increased ICE activity here, because if you need more office space, that sort of automatically implies you're going to have people to occupy it. But yeah, they're looking for a space with about 19 parking spaces. So that tells you approximately the the size of the staff that they might be looking at. Interestingly, in the solicitation, it does say that the building, and they say that this can either be a new build or it can be an existing building that would be retrofitted, but that they would need to be able to construct a secure doorway, sally port to bring immigration detainees in and out of the building. So even though it's not going to be a detention center, they're clearly foreseeing there being some, bringing people in, maybe processing them and then sending them out or something. So there would be some actual engagement in immigration enforcement, like right there on the site. So they're looking for that. The solicitation ended December 30th. So presumably anybody who was interested or had property to offer up for this has already submitted it, and I guess we'll see what comes out of that. In the meantime, there is also some discussion both at the local and state level about increased local and state participation in immigration enforcement. The News Sentinel had an interesting story that County Commissioner Andy Fox, who of course is one of the most conservative, far-right, MAGA members of County Commission, is putting forth a resolution or proposal to expand the Knox County Sheriff's Office's engagement with ICE. So the Sheriff's Office already has an agreement called the 287G agreement with ICE, which is this is a way that local law enforcement agencies across the country can participate in immigration enforcement, which is otherwise defined as a federal responsibility. And
I think the simplified version is the Knox County Sheriff's Office can't arrest people for violations of immigration law, but with the 287G program, they can hold them for a little while to see if immigration wants to come take care of them.
Yeah, and actually it's even so there's two kinds of 287G agreements. There's what they call like a jail model and an enforcement model. And the jail model is more common, and that's what we have had here since 2017 when former Sheriff J.J. Jones signed up for it under the first Trump administration. And so the Sheriff's Office has been participating ever since then. And what that model does is it is that they hold immigrant detainees, but they can actually process them. So if somebody is brought in to the jail, this has to be somebody who's brought in on some other charge. They're not people who are only brought in because they're suspected of being in the country without documentation. So somebody's arrested for DUI, or it can be really honestly just like a minor traffic stop or something, all the way up to a more serious criminal offense. As part of booking them, the Sheriff's Office has people who are trained then to access the ICE database and check to see if this person might be eligible for deportation. And if they are, then they can actually go ahead and initiate that proceeding right there at the jail. Then the next steps have to be taken by ICE, where that person would eventually be taken and transported to an ICE detention center somewhere. So that's what they've had. What Fox wants to do is step that up and have the Sheriff's Office actually also do an enforcement agreement with ICE, which would, to some degree, enable trained Sheriff's Office staff to actually do the enforcement part, where they're out there either on their own or alongside ICE agents actively looking for people who are here illegally. And this would be a big change because the 287G program has been controversial. Certainly local immigrant rights advocates have, sort of long protested against Knox County being part of this. But the Sheriff's Office has always said, well, we're not out there looking for people. The only people who get, screened through our engagement with ICE are people who are brought in for other offenses. The enforcement model would change that, where the Sheriff's Office would actually be partners in going out and actively looking for people who are here illegally and then bringing them in and beginning the deportation process.
So I want to add a little context for the question I'm about to ask, because I think coming up in this mayoral election we have coming up is going to be taxes and budgets are going to be one of the primary topics for this election. So do either or both of these 287G programs include funding, or is this something that Knox County will be funding? on its own.
I don't believe they do. I know the jail, because we've written a lot about the jail model that we have, because that's the one that we have. And the jail model does not come with any funding. There is some training provided, but beyond that, no funding. It's just something they do. I don't think there's any real extra funding that comes with the enforcement model. This would essentially be the sheriff's office taking on a new set of responsibilities above and beyond their, ostensible job, which is actual criminal law enforcement. Because again, we've said this before, but it's always important to point out, immigration enforcement is not a criminal matter. Being in the country illegal being in the country without proper documentation or authorization is a civil offense. It's not a criminal offense. You will hear people say these people are committing crimes. They are not. That's not correct. And so the sheriff's office typically doesn't get involved in civil enforcement, but that would be what they would be doing under this. And so apparently Fox is going to bring this, I guess, for discussion this month at County Commission. We will see. I would imagine that would be a pretty contentious discussion. Certainly a lot of immigrant rights advocates, I imagine, would show up to talk about that. And then probably some people who are very enthusiastic about cracking down and getting rid of a whole bunch of people who are here, mostly working as landscapers and hotel maids and all of the other things that immigrants in this country actually do, because they are vastly not people who are engaging in criminal activity. They're just here living and working, but then they could be subject to the Knox County Sheriff's Office just kind of going around and looking for people who they think might be quote unquote illegal and going after them.
And again, for me, like again, staying in the same context of my question, we've had a chronically understaffed sheriff's department as it sits, and we will now have our less than ideal number of sheriff's officers on the street doing an additional task above what they already are understaffed to do. That would be my question. The whole thing. We can leave the argument about how you feel about the immigration or not. It's like we can't staff this department to do what we need it to do as it sits, let alone adding more tasks.
Yeah, I'm sure that will be part of the discussion when it comes up. The other story that came out related to this week is the News Sentinel, Allie Feinberg, good reporter, had an interesting story about some coming moves at the state. She covered an event that State Representative Jason Zachary went and spoke at, hosted by Americans for Prosperity, the conservative interest group, lobbying group, where Zachary said that there's a whole raft of bills coming in the upcoming state legislative session that will basically, the state has already in recent years passed various new laws related to immigrants in the state, but I think he said there's something like a package of 8 to 10 bills that in various ways would greatly increase the state's engagement in immigration enforcement. It didn't have details. We'll have to wait and see what those bills look like. One measure that has been introduced and passed in some other states, including Florida, that is possible. Again, I don't know if this is one of the bills that would be talked about, but it's something that has been passed in other very red southern states, could actually require local law enforcement agencies to enter into these ICE agreements, which have always been, they're voluntary. And, up until very recently, only a handful of sheriffs or police departments in Tennessee had been engaging in this. As recently as a few years ago, the Knox County Sheriff's Office was one of only 2 law enforcement agencies in the whole state that had a 287G agreement. So that is certainly one thing the state could look at, is telling every law enforcement agency, including, say, the Knoxville Police Department, which does not have an agreement with ICE, that they have to actively engage in this. I guess we'll have to see. I'm sure there will be a lot of discussion at the state about that too.
And again, my brain is on this 2026 election cycle all over it. So we've got that'll be the timing of it's going to be very hard for the political cycle of the sheriff's race that we have this year, but it likely will be a topic that's talked about and discussed.
Yeah, you have to imagine, we have a contested Republican primary for sheriff. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that a lot of those candidates are going to be like if anybody asks them their views on immigration enforcement, I imagine they're going to talk real tough about it, because that's certainly the current has become the current Republican orthodoxy, especially under President Trump, that, you know, we're going to be as tough as we can on immigrants. They still frame all of this as going after criminal aliens, the worst of the worst, people who are gang members and so forth. But that is, like, there's been multiple studies using the government's own data that shows, I think the most recent thing I saw said that 85% of the people who have been detained by ICE over the past year do not have criminal convictions. And so it is certainly not only criminals who they really are. And you can see this. There's lots of videos out there of ICE agents literally just rolling down the street and grabbing people, right, apparently because of their skin color. Or I just saw one video the other day where they're haranguing an Uber driver in Minneapolis because he has an accent, and he's a Somalian guy, evidently a U.S. citizen, because he certainly wasn't intimidated by these guys at all. And he's saying to them, really? Like, that's because I have an accent? You need to, this is the level of investigation that's going on.
Right. And the contrary to me says, okay, if the conversation is you shouldn't be here, we're going to get rid of you. Okay, we can argue that point to death. But when we are bypassing the due process for U.S. citizens and truly racial profiling and stuff like that, there are some questions that you can't help but ask as we're sitting watching this, and they're usually not good questions.
Well, I mean, we are already in a situation where we have government agents out there every day demanding papers from people, like, because of how they look or where they happen to be or what accent they have. Suddenly you are placed in the position of having to affirmatively prove that you have a right to be there. And that is that whole kind of papers, please thing. Like, that is something we associate with movies about the Nazis and so forth. And it's not an experience that most Americans have been familiar with, and seems like one that, whether we like it or not, more of us are going to get familiar with.
To be fair, like, we've had some stuff in state law that's passed over the last couple of years that may have been preparatory for some of this, and in requirements to show ID when asked, and without any pretext or probable cause. I think it's the technical legal word, as far as, like, cop asks you for your ID, you're obliged by law to give it to them. And it's like,
well, and there's a really interesting case. I mean, we've all had to go and get these real IDs, right? That was a whole system that was created coming out of 9/11, where it was like, we have to make sure that we know who people are. And so they created this whole real ID system, which, if you've been through it, which probably most people have at this point, you know what it involves. You have to show a heightened level of documentary proof of who you are and your citizenship status. You got to bring in your birth certificate or whatever it is in order to get that real ID. The whole idea behind the real ID is that, well, once you have that real ID, if somebody, asks to see, wants to see your immigration status, are you here legally? That real ID signifies that. But DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is now saying, no, it's not sufficient. Now, DHS administers the Real ID program. This is the department that created the Real ID program in order to have a reliable system of knowing who people are. And now we have people in some of the states that have seen these ICE crackdowns are pulling out their Real IDs and showing them to ICE agents, and they are saying, I don't care about your Real ID, it's not sufficient. So these are ICE agents working for DHS, the department that created and administers the Real ID program, who are saying, no, our own department's documentation is insufficient for us. So anyway, obviously this is an issue that is going to continue to, I don't even want to say percolate. It's already doing more than percolating at the local, state, and national level. There are very strong feelings on both sides of it. We do live in a generally conservative county and in a quite conservative state, and the conservative position on all of this right now seems to be that there's kind of no limit on what government can do to try to ascertain somebody's status, and then what they can do to them if they decide that they don't meet whatever requirements they've set out. So we're going to get a chance to probably have some local discussion of this, and certainly discussion at the state level here in the next little while.
It's going to be a very hectic session in the State House. I'm thinking this year we're going to have a lot of stuff because they're trying. Again, I can't get out the election out of my brain. The sooner they get out, the sooner all of the House members and half the state Senate members need to get in their election cycle quick. So they're going to want to get it done and get to that job pretty quickly.
Yep, it's going to be. I mean, the year is already starting out pretty wild, and I think it's going to get wilder. All right, little more local here. We had some interesting news this past week. Angela Dennis wrote a great story for us at Compass, which, by the way, you can find at CompassKnox.com. I forgot to say that up top. I'm sure everybody remembers the big controversy last fall over a proposal to sell part of Chilhowie Park to the Emerald Youth Foundation. They wanted to open a new recreation and worship center that would have included soccer fields and various community service offices. That was rejected by City Council after there was a big outcry from people in the community who didn't want that part of Chilhowie Park to be sold to Emerald Youth or to anybody. Part of the discussion at that point from people who were opposed to the sale, there were a lot of people who said, look, we're not opposed to what Emerald Youth is trying to do here. That sounds great. Just find another place for it. And maybe they're going to. One of the challenges with that idea of them finding another place is that there aren't that many large, undeveloped or developable chunks of property in East Knoxville. But there's one right there on Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue, and it is currently occupied by the Five Points Shopping Plaza. And this is an interesting property because it was developed about 20 years ago as part of a sort of urban redevelopment program using some federal funding. And the idea was to create a new commercial hub there in the middle of East Knoxville, which was something that a lot of residents had identified as, they wanted some more, a grocery store and some other amenities that they could walk to in their neighborhood. And so it opened with kind of a lot of hoopla. There was initially a grocery store there. The grocery store didn't last because, grocery stores require fairly high volume to operate successfully, and there actually already is a Kroger a little ways down Asheville Highway there, and there didn't turn out to be enough of a market there to support the grocery store that opened. There is still a Dollar General there, which kind of became the de facto neighborhood grocery store. And so a lot of that plaza has been empty over the last 20 years. It ended up owned by Eternal Life Harvest Center, a big church, which does have a big church property there. It's one of two locations they have. There are other locations on Western Avenue. And then there's a couple of other shops and stores. But you could certainly say it's been an underutilized property commercially, and it's big. It occupies, essentially an entire block, and it has just rolled off of its initial financing agreement with the Industrial Development Board, where it had a 20-year sort of payment in lieu of taxes agreement. And that has ended, which means the property is now all of the property is now formally owned by the church. And there has been talk and rumors in the community about what they might do with it, because the reality is that the church may not actually need that property for sort of its own purposes.
Well, because they are leasing some of the units currently.
Yeah.
And so, they obviously don't need the whole property.
Right.
And so they have some lessees, but not enough probably to cover the expenses, or maybe enough to cover the expenses and stuff, but nothing that's functionally doing what they needed to do with that size of a piece
That's
of land.
Right. And so now they do have this large piece of property that theoretically, I mean, it could be used by anybody. I think if you were going to redevelop it, presumably you would have to take down the existing buildings that are there. I mean, a lot of the property is just a parking lot, but it could theoretically be redeveloped. And so Angela Dennis, the reporter who wrote about this for Compass, she went and talked to all the players. The church basically was mum. They didn't want to say anything about what their plans might be, which of course doesn't dampen anybody's speculation. Emerald Youth just kind of said, well, we are still interested in possibly looking at properties. They didn't say anything about that property in particular, but certainly creates the sense that, well, maybe there's some discussion going on there that has created some concern in the community because a couple of, as you said, there are a couple of tenants there on the property. One of them is WJBE, the local community radio station, which is housed right there. And so if something were to happen to the property where it got sold and redeveloped, like the people who are there, who are renting space right now, would obviously have to move. And so there's some concern in the community about that. So we will wait and see.
Did I imagine reading that there was some, at least, insinuation of request to vacate from the property owner to the tenants? Or
yeah, I think there is. I don't think the tenants have been given a lot of confidence that that they're going to be there for the long time. The radio station received a notice last month that the radio station should try to be out of there in the next 30 days. So obviously there are some plans in the works, and we will probably hear more about this in the near term.
It's possible that the plan has nothing to do with Emerald Youth, as far as
it's possible.
It seems like these two things kind of fit together in the logical.
Let's just say that at the moment nobody's denying that could be a possibility. So as long as nobody's saying no, we're not doing that, it certainly leaves it open. And I think it'll be interesting to see then what, like, if that proposal does come forward. First of all, it would be very different than the Chilhowie Park proposal because this is privately owned property. Right. It's not owned by the city. The city council, like, nobody else would have to approve the sale of it.
Right. The only possibility would be some sort of zoning or code issue that they would have to get an amendment or an adjustment to current code to allow this different type of. I guess theoretically the Emerald Youth is a commercial project, but the different C2, C4, C whatever.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the zoning implications could be or whether there would be something that they would have to change there. So, it's possible there would need to be some level of public engagement with it. But also, there would, I'm sure, be opinions in the community. And it'll be interesting to see if people are still sort of sufficiently wary of Emerald Youth just because of the kind of bad taste a lot of people had about the Chilhowie Park proposal. Or if
they hold true to the idea that we'd love to have you here, just not there.
Right.
If that sentiment holds true, then this might be well received by the community, and they might be very excited to get on board and help whatever community part they can.
Yeah, I mean, one thing it would do was it would really put a nail in the coffin of the idea of having a commercial hub there. But I mean, that's already functionally dead. It really is not a commercial hub, and so. You would be losing the potential of it eventually becoming one, and that might bother some people. But I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's a chicken or an egg thing. Like, the demand's not there, and maybe some other project there does start bringing demand for these things in, but you can't have demand for one without having the other, and so it gets kind of into a chicken or the egg's the best analogy I can think of off the top of my head, or cliche, I suppose, is the phrase there. But yeah, I'm curious. I'm very interested to see how the public reacts to this when and if this announcement comes down.
Yeah. Yep. It certainly will be interesting. Okay, from East Knoxville, let's take a little trip out to Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge National Lab is part of a new partnership among all 17 national laboratories who are developing what they're calling the American Science Cloud, which is going to be a big, very ambitious, essentially artificial intelligence network that is going to bring together all of the various computing powers of all of those national labs and all of their scientific expertise to create a giant science-friendly AI system, essentially. And of course, we're all familiar with the different kinds of consumer-grade AI large learning models that have been out there, whether it's, Claude from Anthropic or Grok from Elon Musk's company, ChatGPT from OpenAI, of course, is kind of the industry leader in it. This would not be that. Like, they're not trying to build something that like you or I would just be hopping on and saying, write me a paper for my 10th grade science class. This, like the supercomputers that they already have there at the lab, would be specifically for scientific research and inquiry and looking for ways to, do large-scale research and also ways to automate parts of the whole scientific process to kind of make things faster and easier. One very base-level example that one of the people involved in this gave to our reporter, Thomas Frazier, who wrote about this, is, it could be something as simple as, like, we have all of these different video chat applications now that different people use, different ones. And so you have some people who are using Zoom and some people who are using Microsoft Teams. I don't know why anybody uses Microsoft Teams, but some people do. There's people
we can
who
ask Risewick that and why we've got to do that for this
course. Some people who use WebEx. And so the sort of example that was being given was, if you had a sufficiently skilled and nuanced AI, it might be able to bring all of those things together, and so that you wouldn't have to, you could just kind of go to the AI and be like, okay, like set up a chat with whoever, and it would use like whichever application was best suited to it.
Kind of more like what we're used to with our phone service. Like I have an Apple, you've got an Android. Yeah. They still functionally talk together.
Right. They can call each other and text each other.
A way to bridge that gap in the video service. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a very obviously the bigger wins would be on sort of like the research and development side.
Well, we got to remember
what you can do with that much, not just that much computing power, because AI is not just computing power, but it is actually, it's the intelligence side of it. It's not just going and searching things or being able to run a huge number of calculations very quickly, but actually being able to bring together different kinds of information and synthesize it in new ways and so forth.
Right. And we got to remember too that not long ago, President Trump had announced a Manhattan-style project in the AI space. This seems to fit.
This is part of that, right? That's the Genesis mission, they're calling it. And
for me, when you say Manhattan Project, what did the Manhattan Project do? This is a military application, and I'm sure that will be part of this project as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you can imagine anything with massive federal investment and involvement will certainly have military applications, but probably not only military applications, lots of other ones as well. So that's big news out of Oak Ridge, and be interesting to see where it leads, whether it brings us to a utopia of new scientific discovery or a dystopia of enslavement by the machines. We'll find out.
Yeah, I've seen Terminator 2 a couple times. I know the long run of this thing.
Right. The Matrix. I mean, we've had a lot of warnings about the different ways this could go.
Speaking of Terminator 2 and all the death and destruction that goes on in that, we've got a lot less of that death and destruction here in the city of Knoxville.
Nice segue. That's right.
I'm a student of your guys' work, and I've been paying hard attention to try to master these segues like you guys.
That's right. We don't need no RoboCop because murders in the city of Knoxville, this is data released by the Knoxville Police Department last week, dropped 26% from the previous year after having already come down a bit. Of course, people probably remember we had a big spike 2020, 2021 during the pandemic. There was an increase in violent crime both in Knoxville and nationwide, and there's been a lot of study and contemplation and theorizing about exactly why that particular spike happened. It was clearly an effect of the pandemic era, but it's a little unclear exactly which factors went into that. But regardless, it has been coming down ever since then, and it fell. The homicide number of homicides in the city fell last year from 23 in 2024 to just 17 in 2025. That's the lowest total number of murders documented in the city since 2016. So in a decade. And that's a very low number. It's well below, over the past decade, the average has been 27. So this is, like 33+% down from the average of the last decade. Of course, Police Chief Paul Noel and Mayor India Kincannon have credited this to the various kinds of violence prevention and interruption steps that the city has taken in recent years. That's possible. I think part of the problem with this, and we ran into this when I worked at the city, when you're already dealing with pretty low numbers, even 27 as the average of the past decade. There's 200,000 people in the city, and not everybody who gets murdered in the city is actually a city resident.
Right, or does the murdering either way, right?
Right.
Whatever
but even if you just take that as a percentage of the population, it's an extremely tiny number. And so there's going to be a certain amount of statistical noise from year to year where it's just there was a bad weekend where a bunch of people got in drunk fights and that kind of thing.
Right.
So there's a certain level at which you can't just totally control it. Of course, every time numbers go down, the people in charge of law enforcement are going to take credit for it, because why would you not? And I'm not saying that they don't deserve credit for it. It may well be that this is attributable to some of those steps they're taking. It's just always a little bit hard to especially when we're dealing with already quite
right. It's really hard to point to
numbers.
This policy change that we did over this last year is the reason this happened.
Right.
I know one of the things that, excuse me, that the KPD has been very proud of in some of their different efforts is that they don't see migration of crime when they're really getting numbers down in a certain part of the city. It's not moving to another part of the city. I assume we'll get some data out of the county at some point, and so there could be some of this could move out to county. We don't know. We don't get those to compare yet, but at least for KPD's sake, they're very proud of the fact that we didn't just cut it out in this section of town,
right,
and then it moved over here.
Right. It didn't move from East
gone.
Knoxville to
Right.
Lonsdale or whatever, the way sometimes you have seen those patterns in the past,
Right.
especially if it's gang related, which a certain amount of our crime and our homicides are, gang activity can be migratory depending on, you put a lot of pressure here, it can go somewhere else. And right. It was just down overall
right.
across the board. And so it's certainly good news for everybody who lives in Knoxville. And,
And I think just to continue working on my traditions, I think the second part of this segment is maybe the more impressive one to me, just because of our population boom on top of.
Yeah.
We've had less pedestrian and bicycles getting hit by cars or other means of getting killed while walking or biking down the street. And again, with the population increase we've had, it means there's more cars, there's more people moving around, both walking and driving. And to have less of those two coming together in an unfortunate event is a more dramatic, I suppose, number change.
Yeah, it was actually a huge drop percentage wise in traffic fatalities within the city in 2025. It went down 45% from 2024. So that's a big drop. There were only 29 deaths and automobile related deaths total within city limits in 2025. It was down.
Most of those are on the interstate too, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, that's where you get,
Right.
your most high speed collisions, obviously, but that was down from 52 in 2024. So that is a really significant drop. And again, traffic fatalities are another thing that went up nationwide during the pandemic. Again, lots of theories about this. What's going on? Are people being less attentive? Are people being more sort of rugged individualists, every person for themselves out there on the roads? Are people suffering from COVID-induced cognitive failure? Or is everybody? Are more people just high and out there driving around? Hard to know, but they came down here locally, and so the breakdown of those. 8 of those fatalities were people riding motorcycles, which of course are the highest risk form of vehicle traffic. 6 were pedestrians and 1 bicyclist, and then the others were people who were, in a car when they died. And again, the city, and again, very reasonably, as you would expect, because the city has made a policy priority of this with their Vision Zero program, that they're taking various steps across the city to make streets safer for people who are on them, whether they're in a car, on a bike, on foot, and they have put some things in place to try to address some of the areas where they see the most crashes and deaths. And they, again, as with the crime rates, they say, see, what we're doing is working. And that may well be the case. You kind of have to see these things over a period of years. If you go down to 29 and then go back up to 45 the next year, it could look a little more, random. But as you say, and I think that's a very good point, we are in a period of growth, both in the city and the county. And while the city has, 200,000 residents, the county is now over 500,000. And lots of those people who live outside the city come in and out of the city daily, weekly, monthly. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people on our roads and on our streets, a growing, certainly a lot more than there were 10, 20 years ago.
Right. Becky, who's the chair of the State Transportation Board Subcommittee, whatever it's called, she talks all the time. This is one of the busiest stretches of interstate in America.
Yep.
Right here coming through Knoxville because of
the section from downtown west to where I-75 turns off and splits off. That whole section that is basically 2 interstates together, I-40 and I-75, is one of the highest traffic volumes in the state, as we all know, because we all spend time in it.
And maybe that is maybe we stumbled accidentally across the causal. We have this influx of new residents and more people on the roads. So we have more traffic, so we're going way slower. Maybe that's our causal there.
Who knows?
It's certainly more frustrating, I'll tell you that much.
My own anecdotal experience is that whatever's causing it, it's not that people in Knoxville have suddenly become better drivers, because I don't know about you, but I see a lot of very careless. The way that I've always described Knoxville driving to people in other areas is that, it's not that drivers here are super aggressive. They're not as aggressive as you encounter if you go to someplace like Atlanta or Houston, where people are just zipping in and out of, across 6-lane interstates and so forth. They're just careless. I just see a lot of people doing things on the road that are sort of hard to explain. And when you see a car behaving erratically, I just I either back off or try to get around them as quickly as possible. And it can be that they're on their phone. It can be that
they came from a place where that's more normal in the driving patterns. Because I remember times if I've gone to a bigger metro areas, and some of it's natural. You have to be a little bit more aggressive there to get into traffic because people don't let you in. We do have a little bit of that Southern charm left over here where people will let you in traffic. Yeah. Where you get into some bigger cities, people get used to the idea that they're not going to let me in. I stick my nose out. That's the only way they're stopping to give me space. And I definitely see a lot more of that in remembering my experiences, especially when I lived up north and had some time to go down into Chicago, and the way people drive there. We're way too nice down here. It's way too soft.
I prefer, even as I'm saying that, I think there's a lot of bad driving in Knoxville. I prefer driving in Knoxville to driving in Chicago, much less driving in Atlanta, which is just best to not talk about at all.
Exactly. And so I think that's definitely part of the shift in how we are getting used to driving around here. That's part of our the consequence of growth, I suppose, might be a good way to put it.
Yep. But we are, at least for this past year, managed to grow and also have fewer people killed on the roads in Knoxville. So good job, everybody.
Right.
Keep it up.
We might be singing a different song next year.
Yeah.
Speaking of music, take it away.
I love
Jesse.
it. These segues. You're on it. Yeah. So the other story that I wanted to talk about is a clarinetist named James Zimmerman has sued the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra. He claims he's a victim of discrimination. And this is interesting because it fits into this broader narrative around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which of course has become this very dirty word among conservatives. It doesn't have an actual exact fixed meaning. The implication when people talk about DEI is some kind of effort to privilege certain people at the expense of other people. And in particular, what they're talking about is privileging people who are not white men at the expense of people who are. And you hear a lot about this, these anecdotes from assorted, aggrieved white men. And I'm allowed to be a little snarky about white men because I happen to be one. I've been one all my life. And I just have to say that I find the notion that white men have been the victim of widespread discrimination in America fairly comical. There's no statistical basis for this idea at all. If you look at, sometimes people forget that white men are protected by civil rights laws the same as everybody else. And so if a white man out there feels discriminated against, he can file a civil rights complaint and a civil rights lawsuit under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is the federal law that guarantees equal protection regardless of race and gender. And white men do. There are, in fact, cases filed every year, discrimination claims by white men saying that they've been discriminated against. And it is certainly not a ridiculous idea that a white man can be the victim of discrimination. Absolutely, that could happen. I'm sure it has. There have been cases that have been where, the person has filed the complaint and the finding has been in their favor that, yes, you were discriminated against. But
and I think for the facts of this story is the case, the sheriff's office, the symphony orchestra does a same initials, people. I apologize. Does a what they call the blind audition process, which is supposed to take it out.
Right. Well, and so to finish the thought that I had there, the reality is if you look at the number of actual complaints filed, white men do file some discrimination complaints, but they file less than everybody else. The actual breakdown of discrimination complaints, the people who are most likely to assert that they have been discriminated against are Black women. The next demographic most likely is white women. So overall, women experience or assert the experience of discrimination much more than men. The next largest group of complaints of discrimination come from Black men, and the very fewest come from white men. So the data that we have suggests that white men continue to be the least discriminated against major demographic group in our society. It's not saying they are never discriminated against, but this idea that, in the last 10 years we flipped some switch and suddenly white men are the most beleaguered people in society, it doesn't bear out anywhere. There's still way more white men in Congress than there are in the population. White men are overrepresented at every level of government. Certainly in the Tennessee state legislature, there's way more white men in the Tennessee state legislature. There's way more white men running and owning companies. Like, white men continue to be overrepresented proportionally to their percentage of the population at basically every level of, influence and success in society. That is just statistically true. There really isn't any evidence that white men have been suffering some great backlash just for being white men. Nevertheless, that's a very popular narrative on the right, and there are people who have set about trying to prove it through lawsuits, and that is this suit that the Symphony Orchestra...
Well, I'm going to stray a little bit just to throw a plug for your other podcast, because you talk a little bit about that down in Louisiana on the episode that will come out tomorrow, if you're listening to this on release day, and some of the ways that
in Texas, actually.
There's a Texas story.
Yeah, Texas A&M, yes.
Yeah,
very interesting application of the idea of DEI at Texas A&M, and you can hear that in this week's episode of The Progressive South, my other podcast.
All right, bringing it back to the local part here.
Yeah. So James Zimmerman. So he's a clarinetist, and he auditioned for the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra. As you said, Seth, it was a blind audition, which is how they do auditions. They put them behind a screen. They assign them various pieces to play, and they listen to them. He's apparently a pretty good clarinetist. Nobody is saying he's not. And after the audition, he was informed that he had scored the highest on the audition, and that the audition results would then be, but that didn't mean he was hired. The results of the audition would be forwarded to the ultimate decision makers at the symphony about who they're going to hire next, and then they would proceed from there. So, as with many jobs, the first thing they look at is your qualifications, and that's obviously what this blind audition did. That was his qualification. But in most hiring processes, there's another step where, among other things, they will check your references. So Zimmerman, it turns out, had been a clarinetist with the Nashville Symphony Orchestra, and he is no longer. And the reason he is no longer is that the Nashville Orchestra let him go in 2020 because of well-documented complaints of harassment against him by other members of the orchestra, and specifically that he was harassing people on grounds of race and gender. And these are very specific complaints, and you can find all of that online. And so they determined that he was a disruptive force in their orchestra, and they parted ways with him. And so here he is 5 years later auditioning in Knoxville. He does well in the audition, but they call and talk to the Nashville Symphony, and they say, oh yeah, we know him. Here's what happened. And KSO then says, all right, thanks
for coming.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Good luck out there.
And they go to the second person on the audition list and hire them. And it's not clear from the complaint here who that person is, but it is somebody who is apparently not a white man, because the lawsuit that Zimmerman has filed asserts that they decided not to hire him because of what he calls his stance on DEI issues, and instead went with what he calls a DEI hire, meaning, they hired some unqualified non-white man to take my rightful place. And he is being represented in this by a well-known conservative activist lawyer who has filed various quite ideological cases advancing conservative interests, including one at the Supreme Court. So this is obviously it's a political lawsuit in its orientation, trying to jump onto this kind of train of DEI grievances that is out there in kind of the broader rhetoric around the country. And KSO obviously says they will defend their hiring process. It is interesting that he has framed it as he wasn't hired because of his DEI stance. If you look at those complaints from Nashville, it appears that his DEI stance is that he has the right to harass other people who are not white men. But Seth, you and I were talking about this a little bit before we started recording. If you step back from this whole argument over race and gender, you kind of get to this more fun. He's basically saying that I finished first in the audition, therefore you legally have to hire me. And that is just not really how most hiring works. I mean, like I just said, the qualifications are always the first thing they'll look at, but then there's other things you have to think about. And if you think about a symphony in particular, right, this is a big group of people who by definition have to work very well together in order for anything to go well. You may even
want to say they have to work in harmony.
That's right.
To just throw out some bad puns and stuff here. But I mean, yeah, I was telling you before we started about we were kind of discussing the show prep here. It's like, as you guys probably know from my random interjections, I do own a business, and we've had people that have very good resumes that have come in and filled out applications, and we've talked to them, and many parts of theirs makes it seem like they would be very good for the specifics of the job. But there is a culture that we have cultivated over the years of how we work as a team and all that kind of stuff, and it was clear in talking to them in their interviews or whatever it is that how no matter how good they were at the job, they would be a disruption to the culture that we have.
Right.
And sometimes that's a good thing. And sometimes that can be an intentional thing in hiring. But for us in certain situations, it's like, we really like you, but we really don't think you're a good fit here kind of phrase. And it's the fit here part. It's not the what you can and can't do part. It's the fit here part. And so, I think the blind audition thing here does kind of like I can empathize with the thought process if I've
and he probably thought he'd gotten the job because he was told you finish first, and so he probably thought finally 5 years after being fired at Nashville, I'm going to get another symphony job.
Right, and so I could exactly. So you could kind of empathize with the position of like I thought this is where we're going, and if you have that mindset going into it, that then this other person is of color or woman or whatever the racial gender inverse is of whatever your stance is, I could see a very basic rationalization that this is true. However, your own history, and so to try to pretend like that history didn't happen, and that he evidently thinks he was unfairly treated in Nashville too, and so he's like doubly mad that now this thing that he already feels like he was a victim in Nashville, and now that is being used against him to keep him from getting another job in Knoxville. Right, and there's no way for us to know, at least as the public, if he has had a change of heart on those things. It seems clear by what's happening now that he hasn't, but it is somewhat understandable on the very surface level where this conversation could start from his side, but it's really a little bit confounding that once you get past the surface level that you think this is the right move. Yeah, and there's nothing in any law that says that there's some absolutely objective metric that everybody has to use in making hiring decisions. This whole idea of like who is quote unquote most qualified. The reality is that in most jobs, qualifications are kind of like there's your education background, sure. There's your work experience, absolutely. I am definitionally qualified to be the President of the United States of America. Right, yes. That doesn't mean I'm qualified to be the President of the State. Right. Doesn't mean I do a good job. I certainly have put enough stuff on the record that nobody would ever elect me at least for the President. I could probably sneak some. Depending on who you were running against, I'd give you a serious look. But what I'm saying, like, so I think that's kind of the underlying theme here. Is like there's this idea that the ode part of it, I think, is the underlying theme that I can't wrap my head around. Like nobody owes anybody anything, and right. Especially, well, I guess KSO. Are they publicly funded? How does that work? KSO receives some funding, from the city and county. I mean, they're a private nonprofit. They do get some public funds, but they're absolutely subject to civil rights laws. They are not allowed to discriminate on race and gender. And they say in this case, they're not discriminating on race and gender. They are saying this particular person, because of their particular history, we don't think would be a good fit for our organization. Which is, as you're saying, that's a decision that HR departments make all the time, everywhere. And just because you feel like you're the most qualified for a job does not mean that you are somehow legally owed that job. Right. And that's also like, or that would be my interpretation of it. He's filed a lawsuit. We will see how far that goes and what a judge or jury might think of that. Let's put the premise in check here a little bit too. This is also the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra. This isn't, we don't, the KSO can get away with not having the best of the best at every position and still put a very good show on for us when we do the 4th of July. And you might also have a case maybe if you were applying somewhere and they only had, 2 white men out of, 70 people or whatever, but that is emphatically not the case with the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra. There are plenty of white men in the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra. Like including the concert master. Right. So I think to me, it sounds like a hard case to make. I guess we'll see what happens. I mean, it's a good way to make headlines is what it is. And this immediately got picked up by Fox News. I think Megyn Kelly, the conservative commentator, was talking about it. And that might be what this guy and his lawyer are actually looking for. Although it's hard to get paid just by being on, Fox News. Maybe he's got a Pops album that he did. He's going to go into studio and do his own album. Maybe this will help him with some albums. Well, and it does sound like apparently he's a pretty good clarinet player. So maybe that's what he ought to do. Sit home someplace where he doesn't have to work with other people. Go write songs about how you feel about DAI, publish them, and I'm sure some publisher will pick you up, especially now. Get into soundtrack work maybe or something. You can find some work somehow. But I mean, again, that to me, that's kind of one of the other little factors here. Is like this is such a niche subset of employment. there is probably realistically there's a super long list of people that are capable, and a very short list of positions to be filled.
Right.
I mean, nationally, if nationally we combine for 1 million total professional concert instrumentalist, regardless of what instrument it is, that seems like a high number to me.
Yeah,
and
I think it's probably
I know
lower
that,
than that.
you know, I'm sure you have a similar experience. If you had a decent band program in your high school, there are probably at least a dozen kids out of most high schools here that would be capable of stepping into that role if they're clarinets. But just in general, an instrumentalist in general, there are plenty of kids in our high schools right now that could go play for KSO, and quality-wise, we wouldn't notice a difference.
Yeah. Certainly people who have actually been through, who you do have to have qualifications. KSO does not hire people right out of high school, but they do hire people with experience and with music degrees and adequate training and everything. And it is absolutely true that there are no doubt more technically qualified classical musicians in the U.S. than there are full or part-time orchestra positions.
Just another little take on it too, because I think one of the things by being a member of a group of like KSO in a municipal orchestra, for lack of a better word, it's probably just as much of a bonus to your private lessons business than it is anything else. It's like, I am the lead, or I am a member of this organization.
Right. Well, and that's another thing that was part of this, because this is in his lawsuit, that the position itself only pays about $46,000, because it's not even I think it's like a 35-week schedule that they're on. So it's not even a completely full-time position. They do not, shockingly, classical musicians do not get paid a ton of money. I don't know if that surprises anybody. But yeah, I did see some commentary about that online with people saying he's doing all this over a $46,000. Practically make that going and working at Target or something.
I would bet most members side gig with private lessons around town, and having that as part of your resume when you're selling to parents and whatever to teach their kids. And so, I could see the argument that it's not just about $40,000. It's about the additional $40,000 that he would have been making a year in private lessons that now he no longer has.
Yeah. Although I know some people who teach private lessons, and I feel like $40,000 a year is probably that's a high number for those. But yes, no, I think you're right. It's a professional position that gives you professional standing for whatever else you might be doing. So we'll follow that suit.
I'm sure the pattern probably goes the other way too. It's probably more of, we have Knoxville Symphony Orchestra members going to Nashville, because that's probably a functional step up in the hierarchy of orchestras around. And so the step down probably brings its own red flags regardless of that. It's like, why would you leave that one? That one's a bigger... Yeah.
Well, and obviously when they called and checked, the red flags were real. At least that's what they're saying. Looking ahead to this coming week, actually not a tremendous amount on the civic calendar in terms of public meetings and so forth, but this is the week leading up to Martin Luther King Day next Monday, January 19th, where every year the MLK Commemorative Commission here in Knoxville has sort of a week of events, and you can find all of those online at mlknox.org, but they include an interfaith prayer service on Wednesday at Mount Olive Baptist Church, the annual awards luncheon, which is sold out. So if you don't have a ticket, sorry about that, on Thursday. And then on Friday, there will be a community forum at 7 p.m. at the Beck Cultural Exchange Center. Saturday brings the 30th annual Diversity Day and Race Against Racism at 9 a.m. Saturday morning, hosted by the YWCA of Knoxville. And then Sunday night brings the Night with the Arts tribute at the Community Evangelistic Church. And on MLK Day itself, which is leaping ahead to next week, but next Monday, the annual MLK Memorial Tribute Service is at noon at Overcoming Believers Church. As you probably know, if you pay attention to MLK events every year, there is no longer an MLK Day parade, which used to happen on MLK Day every January. That parade has been moved in recent years to Juneteenth, June 19th, because the weather's usually a little bit nicer in June than it is in January. So no parade, but all of those things coming up. You can find those online. And we'll be back next week to talk about anything that happens in the interim. Hopefully we will be rejoined by our friend and captain, the editor of Compass, Scott Barker.
Speaking of, we missed a very important event that happened last week.
Is that Scott's birthday?
In our review of last week. So yes, Scott's now like 37, 38, something like that. I can't remember.
He's somewhere in there. He's getting up there.
And we didn't get to make fun of Alabama. So anyway, we got to flex why he's not here when we can. Alabama sucks. Anyway, and I'm working on a mayoral debate. I'll have more information on that coming soon. I really want to do
a county debate for county mayoral candidates.
For county mayors. And so,
watch this space.
Yeah, I'm really excited to try to put that together. I think it'll be fun. But right. We'll see. It's always hard to pin those people down. So,
well, as always, thank you, Seth, for your production work, and also for jumping in on the mic here. And
I'm a real boy.
Scott's absence. Thanks to Will Wright for our theme music, and we'll talk to you later.
CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.